The alert didn't just beep, it howled through the quiet lab like it was ripping open a wound that had never healed. A red banner flashed across the screen, followed by a notification no one expected to see in their lifetime. Cold case match, high confidence. Chairs scraped. Gloves dropped. Conversations died mid-sentence. For a moment, it felt like the entire cold case room forgot how to breathe. They had run that old evidence countless times over the years, each attempt ending the same way. Nothing. Silence. Another dead end to add to the pile. But this time, something responded. One of the analysts stepped forward, hands trembling as if she already knew this was going to change everything. The data loaded slowly. Too slowly. Testing everyone's patience in the most painful way possible. Then the name appeared, a name no one expected. A name that instantly changed the temperature of the room. Shock. Confusion. Anger. Because the match didn't point to some stranger. It pointed to someone who had walked freely among them for nearly 2 decades. Someone who lived an ordinary life while a family suffered in silence. A case that had become a haunting memory suddenly snapped back to life. But the truth behind this alert didn't begin in a lab. It began long before 2024 ever existed, on a suffocating August night in 2006, when a young woman named Jessica took her final walk home and never made it to her front door. Before we move into that night, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. August in Florida isn't just hot, it presses down on you, clinging to your skin, sticking to your breath, making every step feel heavier than it should. That night in 2006 was one of those nights, the kind that made people hurry indoors, close their windows, and pray for relief. But Jessica didn't have that luxury. She had 3 short blocks to walk after her shift. And she was tired. Too tired to wait for a ride. Too close to justify calling anyone. Her street usually buzzed with life, porch lights glowing, dogs barking at everything and nothing, the occasional neighbor watering their lawn far later than necessary. But that night, the neighborhood felt off. Quiet in a way that didn't match the heat. Still in a way that didn't feel earned. As she turned the corner, a streetlight flickered weakly above her, struggling to stay alive. It didn't fully go out, just enough to make the shadows stretch in uncomfortable ways. She adjusted her bag, wiped sweat from her temple, and picked up her pace. She wasn't aware of the attention on her. She couldn't feel the stare that followed her steps. The slow, calculated patience of someone who had been waiting for the right moment. She didn't know she wasn't alone. To anyone watching from a window, she would have looked like any young woman heading home after a long day, exhausted, ready to collapse into bed, counting steps until she reached her door. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, nothing that screamed danger. But those final blocks were holding a secret that would tear a hole through the community, a secret she never had the chance to escape. Jessica's phone buzzed as she walked, the faint glow lighting up her face for a split second. She pulled it from her pocket, stared at the screen, and typed the message that would become the final record of her voice in this world. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't even emotional. It was ordinary, painfully ordinary. A quick update to a friend. A casual, "I'm almost home." A simple note meant to reassure someone that she was okay. She hit send. The message went through. Delivered. Never replied to. That timestamp. It still crushes people's chests when they look at the case file. Because everything after that moment is blank. No footsteps captured on home security. No calls. No sounds. No trace of where she turned or who approached her. It's the kind of silence that breaks families. Her friend tried calling back minutes later, annoyed at first, then confused, then scared when the call rang without an answer. She sent more messages that would sit unread, until investigators collected the phone from evidence years later. Each unopened text like a punch to the ribs. The anger comes from that moment. Because Jessica should have been able to walk those last few minutes without fearing anything. She should have made it home. She should have lived to laugh about how hot that night was. Instead, That final message became a timestamp frozen in pain, the last proof that she was alive, breathing, moving, hopeful, unaware of the danger closing around her. Somewhere between hitting send and stepping forward, someone interrupted her world, and they walked away with a secret no one would uncover for almost 2 decades. Those 3 blocks should have protected her. They weren't tucked away in some isolated corner. They weren't known for trouble. Families lived there. Kids rode bikes there. People watered their lawns late into the evening. It was the kind of route a parent wouldn't think twice about, the kind of walk a young woman had taken hundreds of times without worry. That's what makes it so infuriating. Jessica wasn't reckless. She wasn't out looking for trouble. She wasn't walking through an unfamiliar place. She was simply heading home, following a path she trusted, a path everyone believed was safe. But danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits, quiet, patient, hidden in plain sight. Somewhere along that short stretch, someone stepped into her routine and shattered everything. There were no screams heard, no struggle noticed, no sudden panic that drew attention. It happened fast, too fast for anyone to intervene, too quiet for anyone to react. It left detectives staring at a map covered in circles and timestamps, trying to understand how a life could vanish in a space so small. It pushed neighbors to question themselves. How did no one see? How did no one hear? Those questions still sting, and the truth only became more haunting when investigators realized how ordinary those final moments had been. She wasn't running. She wasn't terrified. She wasn't aware of anything being wrong. That's what chills people even now, the idea that a person can disappear in a place they trust, during a moment that feels safe. People vanish in ordinary moments. Stay alert, subscribe so you never miss warnings like this. Sophia Martinez woke to the same heavy August heat pressing against her windows, but something felt off the moment she stepped into Jessica's bedroom. The room looked untouched, almost frozen in time, the bed neatly made, textbooks stacked, posters on the wall still smiling. Everything was exactly how it should have been, except for one unbearable truth. Jessica was gone. A chill ran down Sophia's spine even in the sweltering morning air. Her heart thumped in disbelief, pounding in her ears like a warning she didn't want to hear. She called out Jessica's name, voice trembling, hoarse from fear and frustration. But the room swallowed the words. Silence answered. Panic surged, sharp and biting. Sophia's mind raced, trying to piece together what could have happened in the few hours since she had last seen her daughter. Every ordinary noise outside, a bird, a distant car, a dog barking, twisted into suspicion. Could someone have taken her? Who would dare? She ran through the house, checking closets, bathrooms, even the laundry room, convinced that her mind was playing tricks on her. But the truth hit harder than any fear she'd felt before. Jessica was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving only the dread that filled every corner of that modest Kendall home. Her hands shook as she dialed the police, each ring echoing like a countdown. The world outside continued unaware. But for Sophia, the day had begun with a sharp, unbearable edge. The life she knew had fractured in an instant, replaced by a weight that refused to lift. Within minutes, the quiet suburban street transformed into a hub of flashing lights and hurried footsteps. Police cars swarmed, their sirens muted by the morning heat, as uniformed officers canvassed the block with clipped efficiency. Neighbors peeked from windows and doorways, their expressions a mix of confusion, concern, and growing alarm. What had started as an ordinary morning had become something unimaginable. Word spread fast. Families walked the streets, talking in hushed, urgent tones. Mothers clutched their children closer. Fathers muttered theories under their breath, each stranger a potential suspect. The usual rhythm of the neighborhood, the casual greetings, the children riding bikes, was replaced by whispered fear. Media crews arrived soon after, cameras capturing every angle of the modest homes. Reporters jostled for position, their questions sharp, intrusive, demanding immediate answers that no one could give. Headlines would soon declare a teen missing, a community on edge. The frenzy of speculation, amplified by flashing cameras and live broadcasts, turned ordinary neighbors into witnesses in a story they didn't want to be part of. Detectives and officers worked quickly, setting up perimeter lines, speaking with anyone who might have seen Jessica after the end of summer gathering. Each account was vague, inconsistent, or too little to matter. The tension in the air was thick, impossible to ignore, leaving residents staring at familiar streets with suspicion, as though the same asphalt that felt safe yesterday now held secrets in every shadow. The hours stretched on, the neighborhood's calm shattered. Every step, every glance, every unspoken thought was now colored by fear. And somewhere among them, the small detail that would eventually crack the case lay hidden, waiting to be found. As the police combed the streets, one of the officers noticed something unusual near the corner where Jessica had last been seen. Tucked under a discarded newspaper was a small, folded paper crane, pristine and untouched despite the surrounding chaos. Its delicate folds were precise, almost purposeful, and it seemed completely out of place amid the summer heat and urban clutter. Detectives lifted it carefully, gloves shielding the fragile origami from fingerprints or contamination. No one could explain it. Why would an abductor leave such a subtle, almost gentle object behind? It didn't scream threat or violence. It whispered something else entirely, something that unnerved everyone who saw it. Sophia, when shown the crane, froze. Her hands trembled, not from the paper itself, but from the implication that her daughter's disappearance was not random. There was intention here, a message, or perhaps a signature. The thought alone sent a shiver through her. Investigators photographed it from every angle, bagged it as evidence, and debated its meaning in hushed tones. Was it a clue? A taunt? A warning? The questions multiplied, growing heavier with every passing minute. The crane became a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. The vanishing, the silence, the unknown. It was ordinary in size, almost delicate, yet it carried with it an extraordinary weight. For anyone who held it, it was a reminder that something, or someone, had been watching, planning, and moving carefully in plain sight. This small piece of folded paper would haunt the investigation for years. Its presence raised a question no one could answer at the time. Why would an abductor leave that behind? That mystery, simple, yet chilling, became the first thread that would one day lead to the truth. By mid-morning, the neighborhood had become a controlled frenzy. Officers knocked on doors, taking statements from anyone who might have seen or heard something unusual. Each recollection was fragmented. A fleeting glimpse, a shadow out of place, or the faint echo of a distant noise. The streets buzzed with tension, every passerby under unspoken scrutiny. Sophia Martinez remained at the center of it all, her mind looping over the unanswered questions. How had her daughter vanished so completely? Who could do this in a community that prided itself on safety? Every second that passed without answers made the weight in her chest heavier, her frustration and fear intertwining into a quiet rage. Meanwhile, the media's presence intensified, cameras focusing on homes, families, and officers alike. Reporters pressed for immediate reactions, their lenses capturing every twitch, every glance, amplifying the neighborhood's anxiety. Speculation spread like wildfire, with each new headline and broadcast adding pressure to the investigation. But no concrete leads emerged. Amid this chaos, the paper crane loomed as a haunting anomaly. Investigators discussed its implications repeatedly, but clarity remained out of reach. The deliberate nature of the gesture unsettled everyone. Most victims never had a clue this precise, this deliberate. It was a puzzle piece that both teased and tormented, signaling that the disappearance had layers no one had yet uncovered. As the first days stretched on, the reality settled over the neighborhood. The ordinary had been shattered, and an invisible threat had carved its mark into their lives. The tension was a constant, gnawing presence, and every unanswered question felt like a warning. Most victims never get a clue this deliberate. Follow so you don't miss the moment everything changes. Jessica Martinez wasn't just a name in a news report. She was a whirlwind of energy, curiosity, and determination. At 17, she carried the kind of optimism that could light up any room. Friends described her as bold yet compassionate, someone who could make even strangers feel seen. She loved music, often humming tunes while walking home from school or tapping out rhythms on her desk during class. Her dreams were vibrant, tangible, and deeply rooted in the people she cared about. Jessica wanted to study psychology, driven by an innate desire to understand others and help them navigate life's challenges. She spoke openly about attending college in Florida, imagining herself making a difference in the lives of teenagers like her. Her aspirations were ambitious but grounded, a reflection of a young woman who believed she could shape her own path. Relationships mattered to her. She was devoted to her mother, Sophia, sharing late-night conversations about hopes, fears, and the future. With friends, she was playful and loyal, the kind of person who remembered birthdays, offered encouragement, and stood up for anyone being bullied or excluded. Teachers remembered her as perceptive, curious, and eager to contribute in class discussions, never satisfied with surface-level answers. Even in ordinary moments, Jessica's presence was magnetic. A simple smile could shift the mood of a room. A kind word could soothe someone struggling. She had the rare ability to make life feel fuller, even in small everyday interactions. Her story is more than the tragedy that later consumed headlines. It's a reminder of a life interrupted, of a teenager full of potential, laughter, and light. As we follow the path leading to her disappearance, it's crucial to remember the girl behind the news, not just the case file, and the family who loved her fiercely. Jessica's final week was like any other teenager's, filled with school, friends, and small routines that made life feel normal. She attended classes, laughed with her classmates in the hallways, and spent hours finishing homework, while occasionally texting her friends about weekend plans. There was a subtle vibrancy in her days, a sense that everything ahead was still wide open. Even as the oppressive August heat pressed down on South Florida, she attended a low-key end-of-summer gathering just a few nights before her disappearance. It was casual, full of music, laughter, and teenage chatter. Jessica moved through the crowd effortlessly, engaging in light-hearted conversations, sharing jokes, and occasionally stealing glances at her phone. Each interaction seemed ordinary, but it marked the final threads of her ordinary life before everything changed. Even during mundane moments, Jessica crossed paths with people who unknowingly became pieces of her story. A neighbor smiled as she walked past. A classmate waved from the driveway. A shop clerk chatted briefly while she bought snacks. None of them sensed the looming danger. None knew that a short, familiar route would soon turn into the last moments of her freedom. Amidst the laughter and casual routines, subtle tensions were invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. Hurried glances, small pauses in conversation, the fleeting moments that later investigators would replay endlessly, searching for missed clues. But for Jessica and those around her, life carried on as usual, unaware of the life-altering event about to unfold. Her last week reminds us of how quickly ordinary life can change, how fleeting normalcy can be, and how many moments can remain unnoticed until we look back in the harsh light of loss. Sophia Martinez often described Jessica in ways that captured both her vibrancy and her fragility. She had a light in her eyes that made you feel like anything was possible, Sophia would say, her voice soft but heavy with the weight of loss. She remembered Jessica's laughter echoing through the house, the way she tossed her dark curls over her shoulder when deep in thought, the notes she left behind with little doodles in the margins. Her daughter was fiercely loyal, quick-witted, and endlessly curious. Sophia recalled evenings spent talking about college dreams, career ambitions, and silly teenage drama. Those conversations, once casual and filled with warmth, became poignant memories, reminders of the person the world lost far too soon. Sophia's reflections also carried an urgent, relatable question for everyone listening. How often do we notice the small details of the lives we cherish? Could a parent or friend detect signs if danger was near? Or would ordinary moments continue unnoticed until it's too late? She challenged viewers to consider their own vigilance, empathy, and attentiveness toward those they love. In remembering Jessica, we see more than a headline or a missing person report. We see a girl full of potential, whose ordinary life intersected with the extraordinary tragedy that would follow. Sophia's voice anchors that reality, reminding us that every victim was someone's daughter, friend, or sister, someone whose absence leaves a silent, aching void. The story is not just about the events that unfolded. It's about who Jessica was, the light she carried, and the void left behind. For viewers, Sophia's perspective encourages reflection, empathy, and a sense of urgency, to notice, to protect, and to honor the lives that cannot speak for themselves anymore. From the moment Jessica Martinez was reported missing, detectives faced an overwhelming tide of information. Calls flooded in from neighbors, concerned citizens, and witnesses claiming fleeting glimpses of her on the night she vanished. Each tip felt urgent, yet most led to dead ends. Officers drove up and down the familiar streets, knocking on doors, reviewing security footage, and cataloging every recollection, no matter how trivial it seemed. The pressure was immediate and relentless. The community demanded answers. Reporters camped outside the Martinez home, cameras capturing every glance, every hesitant step. Every officer on the case felt the weight of expectation, not only to solve a disappearance, but to restore the shaken trust of a neighborhood that once felt safe. Detectives built timelines, mapped routes, and reconstructed the last known movements of Jessica. Phone records, school schedules, and casual encounters all became pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. Each lead generated a spark of hope, quickly extinguished by inconsistency or lack of evidence. The frustration was palpable, though unspoken. Officers shared quiet looks in briefing rooms, knowing they were running in circles while the hours, days, and eventually weeks slipped by. Every missed clue, every unconfirmed sighting, magnified the urgency to find her. Amid the chaos, investigators understood one stark reality. The longer the trail went cold, the harder it would become to find Jessica. The sense of responsibility weighed heavily on each team member, yet the maze of possibilities seemed endless. The streets that were ordinary just days ago now felt like a labyrinth, where every corner held the possibility of discovery or another dead end. And somewhere in all this chaos, a single, small detail waited patiently. The paper crane. Unremarkable at first glance, it quietly held a significance no one could yet decipher. Its presence was a reminder that not all answers were found in frantic searches or witness accounts. Some waited to be uncovered in silence, quietly shaping the future of the investigation. Brandon Cole, Jessica's recent ex-boyfriend, became the focus almost immediately. The timing of the breakup, his visible brooding demeanor, and the natural suspicion cast on anyone close to a missing person made him a convenient target. The community whispered behind closed doors, and even neighbors who had previously known him as polite and quiet began to view him through a lens of doubt. Detectives approached him carefully but with the intensity of someone chasing a lead that could crack the case. His answers were measured, almost rehearsed. But every pause and every flicker of uncertainty was scrutinized. The media, hungry for a narrative, amplified every detail of his life, creating a cloud of public suspicion that hung over him like a dark shadow. For Brandon, the scrutiny was suffocating. Family and friends watched as the case transformed him from an ordinary young man into a figure of mistrust. His daily routines were disrupted. He was forced to answer the same questions repeatedly, defend himself against imagined and real accusations, and endure the judgmental eyes of neighbors and classmates. From the investigator's perspective, there were reasons why Brandon looked guilty. His proximity to Jessica, a breakup that left emotional tension, and minor inconsistencies in statements under intense questioning. It all added up to a compelling narrative, yet one that lacked the foundation of hard evidence. Still, suspicion alone was enough to dominate the investigation's attention in those critical early days. As days turned into weeks, every lead connected to Brandon was exhausted. Every interview, every search, every polygraph produced no tangible evidence linking him to Jessica's disappearance. And yet, the community's collective gaze remained fixed on him, a reflection of the human desire for closure and the instinct to find someone, anyone, to blame. Amid this tension, the paper crane lingered quietly in evidence, its meaning untouched and unresolved, a silent counterpoint to the growing storm surrounding Brandon Cole. Brandon Cole endured hours of questioning, each session designed to peel back layers of his story, to uncover inconsistencies or hidden motives. Detectives ran through timelines, cross-referenced alibis, and scrutinized his every movement from the end of summer gathering to the moment Jessica vanished. The intensity of the interrogations left him visibly drained, his answers measured, but sometimes hesitant under the weight of suspicion. Polygraph tests were administered, each result a mixture of relief and tension. Investigators looked for cracks in his story, signs of deceit, any anomaly that could justify their focus on him, yet the tests revealed nothing concrete. They found no fingerprints, no trace evidence, no incriminating messages, nothing that tied Brandon directly to the disappearance. His vehicle and apartment were searched with exhaustive attention to detail. Investigators pulled every fiber, scanned every corner, and ran forensic tests that yielded no leads. Each negative result increased the frustration within the team. They had a suspect who seemed plausible, someone whose demeanor and proximity made him appear guilty. Yet the tangible evidence remained stubbornly absent. Community pressure mounted, neighbors and classmates speculating, some quietly convinced of his guilt while others defended him fervently. Brandon became a symbol of the tension between appearance and reality. A man who looked guilty, yet had done nothing to warrant the suspicion. Throughout all this, the paper crane remained in the evidence bag, untouched and mysterious. Investigators would often glance at it, a small, quiet reminder that the answers they sought might not lie in the obvious. Its presence hinted that the case was far more complex than a single suspect, a detail that silently challenged every assumption. If you think Brandon is innocent or guilty, comment your instinct. Your reaction matters. The case teetered on the edge of frustration and despair, the first wave of investigation producing tension and suspicion, but no resolution, leaving the community and detectives trapped in uncertainty. Amid the whirlwind of interviews, searches, and media attention, one small piece of evidence remained strangely untouched by explanation: the paper crane. Its delicate folds, pristine edges, and quiet presence were in stark contrast to the chaos surrounding Jessica's disappearance. Investigators kept returning to it, hoping for some hidden clue, some subtle hint that would redirect the stalled case. For months, forensic teams examined it, running tests with the technology available in 2006. They checked for fingerprints, fibers, and trace DNA, but the results were frustratingly inconclusive. It became a symbol of the mystery itself, a detail that should have provided answers, but instead deepened the questions. Why was it left there? Was it Jessica's own attempt at communication, or a deliberate signature from someone who had watched her? The crane's presence disrupted assumptions. Detectives were forced to acknowledge that the disappearance was not straightforward. The focus on Brandon Cole, while understandable, could not account for this unexplained anomaly. Each glance at the crane reminded them that the real story might be elsewhere, hidden in plain sight, or waiting for a revelation beyond their immediate reach. As the investigation cooled, the paper crane became a silent marker of unresolved tension. It haunted officers and the community alike, a persistent reminder that the case was far from solved. For Sophia Martinez, it was both a torment and a symbol of hope, a tangible link to her daughter, and a quiet assertion that justice had not yet been achieved. The crane's mystery invited viewers to question everything. How often are small details overlooked, and how many clues remain unnoticed while attention is focused elsewhere? Its presence ensured that Jessica's disappearance would continue to demand attention, even as leads dried up and public interest waned. From the first hours of Jessica Martinez's disappearance, the media descended on Miami-Dade County with an intensity that only heightened the community's anxiety. Television crews set up outside the Martinez home, their cameras capturing every glance, every whispered conversation, every tear shed by neighbors and family members. Local newspapers ran repeated headlines, each iteration more sensational than the last, as the city tried to grasp the incomprehensible. The constant coverage created a sense of urgency, but it also magnified fear. Residents who had once walked their streets with casual confidence now double-checked locks, watched shadows, and hesitated when opening doors. The simplest sounds at night, a car door shutting, footsteps on pavement, the rustle of leaves triggered anxiety and speculation. Parents kept children indoors longer, teenagers hurried home from gatherings, and neighbors formed informal watch groups. Every update from authorities was parsed for clues, and even minor statements were blown into warnings or accusations. Journalists speculated about motives, creating narratives before evidence could support them. The line between fact and rumor blurred, leaving the public on edge, hungry for answers yet increasingly fearful of the unknown. Amid the frenzy, law enforcement struggled to manage both the investigation and the growing tension. Officers were not only chasing leads, they were managing panic, rumors, and public pressure. Each new sighting, every ambiguous tip, added layers of stress to an already chaotic situation. In the midst of it all, one constant reminder of the mystery remained: the paper crane. While the community was captivated by media speculation, the single clue in the evidence bag quietly promised that the truth, though delayed, still existed. It waited, patient, silent, and ignored by all but a few investigators who sensed its significance. As days turned into weeks, the absence of concrete answers allowed rumors to dominate the narrative. The community spun countless theories about what might have happened to Jessica Martinez. Some whispered about a serial predator lurking in the shadows, while others suggested a targeted revenge attack. A few believed she had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in a cruel coincidence. Speculation spread quickly, fueled by fear and the relentless appetite of local media. Every minor incident, every fleeting sighting, was interpreted as a clue, creating a web of stories, some plausible, others completely fabricated. Conversations in grocery stores, at schools, and on street corners often revolved around the same question: who could have done this? Theories were as diverse as the community itself. Some residents trusted law enforcement to uncover the truth, while others grew suspicious of everyone in the neighborhood. Even those closest to Jessica found themselves questioning familiar faces, their trust eroding in the face of uncertainty. For viewers, this period highlights a relatable tension: the danger of assuming, of filling gaps in understanding with imagination. Fear can be as contagious as any virus, spreading silently, affecting daily life and perception. While public speculation surged, one detail remained grounded in reality: the paper crane. It was a singular, tangible clue, untouched by rumor, a quiet witness to the truth that eluded everyone else. Investigators recognized that amidst the noise, answers would not come from speculation, they would come from careful observation, patience, and eventually, breakthroughs in technology and methodology. This moment in the story reminds us how communities can fracture under uncertainty, how fear can overshadow reason, and how critical evidence, even when small and subtle, can hold the key to untangling decades of confusion. The disappearance of Jessica Martinez transformed the quiet streets of Kendall into a tense, watchful landscape. Neighbors, once casual in their daily routines, now scrutinized every passerby and every movement outside their homes. Children were no longer allowed to roam freely. Parents escorted them to school and activities, their eyes constantly scanning for potential threats. The sense of unease extended to teenagers as well. Friendships were shadowed by suspicion, gatherings felt risky, and ordinary moments carried the weight of potential danger. Even familiar faces were viewed with a cautious skepticism, as residents asked themselves if someone they trusted could be capable of violence. Community gatherings were smaller, conversations hushed, and social interactions carefully measured. The invisible presence of fear altered behavior subtly but permanently. Each ordinary routine, taking out the trash, walking a dog, or returning home late, was now accompanied by heightened vigilance. The neighborhood's rhythm had changed, replaced by an anxious pulse that echoed Jessica's absence. Local law enforcement felt the pressure to maintain order while continuing the investigation. Patrols increased, tip lines overflowed, and every unverified sighting amplified both hope and tension. The community existed in a state of suspended fear, aware that the unknown predator was still out there, observing, staying quiet. Even amidst this pervasive anxiety, one small, overlooked piece of evidence persisted quietly: the paper crane. It served as a reminder to detectives that, while the neighborhood lived in paranoia, reality was rooted in tangible clues. Behind the whispers and nervous glances, the answers remained hidden in that delicate origami, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. This subsection highlights how fear can grip an entire community, altering behaviors, trust, and perception, demonstrating that danger is not only in the act itself, but in the long shadow it casts over everyday life. Despite the intensity of the early investigation, the case began to unravel under the weight of missing evidence and dead ends. Leads that initially seemed promising, including witness accounts and security footage, produced nothing conclusive. The focus on Brandon Cole, though understandable, diverted attention from other possibilities, creating blind spots that would take years to uncover. Investigators faced the limits of technology available in 2006. Forensic testing was thorough but often inconclusive. Small details, such as the paper crane, were intriguing but yielded no actionable information. Each day that passed without a breakthrough increased frustration, both for the police and the Martinez family. Community pressure only heightened the tension. Residents demanded answers, speculated endlessly, and sometimes misdirected the investigation with false tips. The noise of public fear and media coverage created an environment where mistakes were magnified and subtle clues were overlooked. Detective Sterling Kincaid and his team recognized that someone was watching silently. The abductor had not acted recklessly. The crime had been calculated, leaving only minimal evidence behind. This awareness of a quiet observer heightened anxiety among investigators, but it offered no immediate leads. The case stalled, transitioning from urgent investigation to a cold file slowly gathering dust in the basement archive. The stagnation left the community and family in limbo. Weeks became months, months became years, and the absence of resolution became a constant presence in the neighborhood. While life continued around them, the unanswered question, who had taken Jessica Martinez, remained, haunting the streets and those who walked them. The paper crane, the last tangible link to that night, continued to occupy its place in the evidence bag, a silent, persistent reminder that the truth was still out there. Someone had been watching, waiting, and staying quiet. For Sofia Martinez, each day since Jessica's disappearance had been a quiet trial. The absence of her daughter was not just a missing person in the papers, it was a void that echoed in every corner of her life. Mornings began with the hope that news might arrive, a phone call, a knock at the door. But each moment of anticipation dissolved into the familiar sting of disappointment. Every sound in the house, every unexpected movement outside the window, carried potential dread. Sofia moved with a heightened awareness, as if at any second, some fragment of truth might present itself, only to vanish again. Friends and relatives tried to provide comfort, but they could not penetrate the armor of grief that had grown thicker over the years. Each unanswered question, each dead-end investigation, reinforced a silent, unyielding tension. Psychologically, she existed in a purgatory of suspended time. Life continued around her, neighbors aged, the city evolved, technology advanced, but for Sofia, the world remained anchored to that August night in 2006. Sleep brought no escape. Dreams were frequently punctured by memories of Jessica's last text, "Almost home, see you Monday." The streets where her daughter had vanished replayed endlessly in her mind, each step closer to home, a reminder of the terror she had endured. Even ordinary tasks became exercises in vigilance. Grocery runs, school events, or casual walks were reminders of the fragility of safety, the unpredictability of human cruelty, and the cruel reality that the person responsible remained unseen, unpunished, and ever present in the shadows of her memory. Sofia's home became a living memorial to her daughter, a space frozen in time. Jessica's room remained untouched, posters on the walls, books stacked neatly on shelves, and the faint scent of her teenage life lingering in the air. Every object, every detail, was preserved not out of obsession, but as a silent testament to a life abruptly halted. Visitors often noticed the stillness of the room, a place that resisted the passage of years, embodying Sophia's refusal to accept absence as final. Her grief, however, was not passive. Sophia channeled the pain into advocacy, tirelessly petitioning local authorities and speaking to policymakers about the importance of cold case resources. She attended meetings, met with law enforcement officials, and quietly lobbied for improvements in investigative technology. Her actions reflected a dual purpose: honoring Jessica's memory and preventing another family from experiencing the same unresolved torment. Beyond advocacy, Sophia reached out to support groups for parents of missing children, offering guidance and empathy to those navigating grief's isolating corridors. Her home, while a shrine, also became a hub of information and connection, a quiet force of action amidst personal devastation. Yet, even with her public efforts, the private loss never softened. The balance between grief and activism was delicate. One fueled the other, creating a relentless rhythm of mourning and purpose. Every petition, every phone call, and every meeting was infused with the weight of 18 years without answers. A personal reminder that her daughter's absence demanded both remembrance and action. Through the early months of the investigation, Sophia developed an unexpected connection with Detective Sterling Kincaid. Their relationship was forged in shared frustration and the mutual burden of unanswered questions. Kincaid carried the weight of the case on his shoulders, and Sophia, never hesitant to voice her concern, reminded him daily that failure was not an option. Their interactions were complex. He respected her persistence, yet sometimes found her intensity exhausting. She, in turn, understood the constraints of law enforcement, the limits of technology, human resources, and procedural rules, but refused to let those limitations define the possibility of justice. Conversations that began as interrogations of evidence evolved into exchanges of strategy, ideas, and insight. Over time, trust developed. Kincaid saw her devotion not as a burden but as a guiding force, a reminder of the human stakes beyond paperwork and protocols. Sophia recognized his dedication and the rare sincerity in his pursuit of answers, even when progress was frustratingly slow. Together, they became a quiet team, aligned by grief and the pursuit of truth, each filling gaps left by the other's experience or insight. Even as the case stalled, their connection provided an emotional anchor. Sophia's advocacy and vigilance inspired Kincaid to remain engaged, to not close the file prematurely. For the community and for her family, their partnership represented hope, a living reminder that even in prolonged uncertainty, commitment and perseverance could sustain a search for justice. Sophia Martinez refused to let the world impose closure on her grief, while others quietly moved forward, accepting the absence of answers. She held firm to the reality of her daughter's disappearance. Her refusal was not stubbornness, it was survival, an act of emotional fidelity to Jessica's memory. Every birthday, anniversary, and milestone passed under the shadow of uncertainty. She did not redecorate the house, did not change routines that reminded her of Jessica, and did not allow distractions to replace the presence of her daughter. Friends suggested therapy, travel, even relocation, but Sophia resisted any move that might signal acceptance of loss. Each decision, each act of remembrance, was a quiet assertion that her daughter mattered and that justice was still owed. Her vigilance extended to the possibility that the case would one day return. Advances in forensic science, shifts in investigative personnel, or even a minor overlooked detail could reignite the search. This hope was not naive. It was rooted in the belief that truth, no matter how delayed, could surface. Sophia's life became a careful balance of remembrance and action. Advocacy, private reflection, and constant attention to news or leads kept the past alive in her present. The psychological weight was heavy, but it sustained her connection to Jessica, ensuring that when the case eventually returned to the public eye, she would be ready not as a passive observer, but as an unwavering participant in the pursuit of justice. This subsection underscores the emotional endurance of a mother unwilling to surrender to time, highlighting the persistence, hope, and resilience that will eventually play a pivotal role in reopening the story. When investigators first encountered the paper crane in 2006, it was immediately recognized as unusual, but its significance was impossible to quantify with the tools available at the time. Forensics had come far, yet the methods for extracting minute traces of DNA or skin cells from delicate, folded paper were limited. Even the most advanced labs struggled to retrieve viable evidence from non-biological surfaces, and investigators quickly realized the crane would yield little more than frustration. Detective Sterling Kincaid, a man who had solved countless cases, understood the value of small clues, but this origami was different. It was not a fingerprint left carelessly. It was carefully folded, placed deliberately, and untouched by obvious handling. Every attempt to examine it with 2006 technology produced inconclusive results. Swabs returned minimal or degraded samples, and microscopic inspection revealed nothing more than the paper's texture and creases. The limitation gnawed at Kincaid. While every other lead seemed to evaporate into dead ends, the crane remained. It represented a tantalizing but inaccessible truth, a message from someone who had committed a violent act, yet left a single, understated calling card. The lack of clarity turned it into an obsession. In police briefings, the crane was discussed repeatedly. Colleagues argued over its relevance, some dismissing it as an irrelevant token, others warning that it might hold the key to understanding the abduction. Kincaid, however, sensed that ignoring it could mean overlooking the single lead that could unlock everything. The crane became both a puzzle and a burden, a fragile object carrying enormous weight. Its presence reminded everyone that the abductor had been calculated, leaving a piece of themselves behind in plain sight. And while it yielded no answers in 2006, the promise of future breakthroughs lingered, a quiet whisper that science might one day reveal what human eyes could not. Detective Sterling Kincaid could not stop thinking about the paper crane. It was small, delicate, and seemingly innocuous, yet it carried a weight far beyond its size. To him, it represented everything that had gone wrong in Jessica's case. The missing evidence, the unanswered questions, and the shadow of a predator who had outsmarted the system. Each night, he replayed the moments he had touched it in the evidence room, imagining what it might reveal if only science could catch up to human intuition. The crane became a symbol in Kincaid's mind, a puzzle box of calm and threat intertwined. Its folds were precise, deliberate, almost artistic, and yet it was tied to a violent act that stole a young life. The juxtaposition haunted him, the beauty of its form against the horror it concealed. Every time he recounted the case to colleagues or in reports, his thoughts inevitably returned to that fragile object, tucked beneath a discarded newspaper, untouched, yet speaking volumes. In quiet moments, Kincaid would reflect on the audacity of its placement. Who leaves a personal, handcrafted token at a crime scene? It felt intentional, a calculated signature designed to challenge investigators. That small crane reminded him that the abductor was not careless. They had observed, planned, and executed without leaving conventional traces. This obsession with the origami did more than consume Kincaid, it shaped the entire narrative of the investigation. Even when leads faded and suspects were cleared, the crane remained a constant reminder of the unknown. It was a riddle that refused to be ignored, a haunting presence in the evidence room, and a psychological anchor for the detective. The crane's quiet persistence ensured it would remain central to the story of Jessica Martinez, a clue that carried the promise of revelation for those willing to explore its folds. It was only a matter of time before advances in forensic science would breathe life into this long, silent testimony. The paper crane remained a mystery, not only to investigators but to the community that followed Jessica's case. Questions swirled endlessly. Why origami? Why this delicate figure and not some other token? Its deliberate placement beneath a discarded newspaper suggested intention, yet no one could decipher its meaning. The unanswered questions only deepened the tension surrounding the unsolved disappearance. Forensic teams in 2006 could offer no insight beyond the crane's physical presence. No fingerprints, no DNA, only the folds of paper and the certainty that someone had crafted it with care. To Kincaid and the original team, it was a puzzle designed to taunt, a silent message that the abductor had been deliberate, controlled, and aware of the chaos he would create. The public, too, latched onto the image of the crane. News outlets highlighted it as a haunting detail in headlines, leaving residents and distant observers alike with a sense of unease. Children, parents, and neighbors all speculated endlessly, constructing theories and imagining motives, yet no one could reach a definitive answer. The origami became emblematic of the case itself, fragile, deliberate, and inexplicably tied to terror. The crane's mystery created a curiosity loop that would endure for nearly 2 decades. It represented a challenge to logic and perception, a reminder that small, overlooked details could carry enormous significance. While the abductor remained unseen, the crane was a witness, a relic that silently waited for technology and human ingenuity to catch up. This unsolved riddle served as a pivot point for the story. It was the link between past failures and future breakthroughs. Its eventual role in reopening the investigation would transform it from a perplexing artifact into a key that unlocked 18 years of unanswered questions. Detective Helena Rhodes was not a name that appeared in headlines or casual conversation, but within the world of cold cases, she carried a reputation that demanded attention. Years of solving cases long forgotten by their communities had honed her skill for seeing what others overlooked, for piecing together puzzles that had once seemed unsolvable. When she was assigned to the Martinez file in 2024, the case had already spent 18 years lingering in silence, a ghost in the archives of Miami-Dade law enforcement. Rhodes approached every case with the philosophy that no detail is too small, no object too ordinary to contain a clue. Her colleagues often described her as patient yet relentless, the kind of investigator who could spend hours examining evidence that others dismissed as irrelevant. For the Martinez case, she saw beyond the frustration that had stifled the original team. She saw opportunity, a path forward where others only saw dead ends. Her first act was methodical, a comprehensive review of every piece of evidence, every interview transcript, every note Kincaid and his team had painstakingly compiled. While many detectives might have been daunted by the age of the file, Rhodes welcomed the challenge. She understood that time could be both an obstacle and an advantage. The advances in forensic science since 2006 offered tools that Kincaid could never have imagined. With a clear sense of purpose, Rhodes assembled a specialized team. Their mission was singular: treat the Martinez case not as a relic of failure, but as a solvable puzzle. Every movement in the lab, every plan in the field, carried the weight of justice waiting to be served. For Helena Rhodes, the paper crane was not a mystery to frustrate. It was a key, and she intended to turn it. Detective Rhodes began her review of the Martinez file with a sharp eye, scanning each report, photograph, and evidence log from 2006. While the original investigation had been exhaustive by the standards of the time, Rhodes immediately noticed subtle gaps, small opportunities overlooked, assumptions taken for granted, leads dismissed too quickly. She saw what Kincaid and his team could not: potential in the tiny details that had haunted the case for nearly 2 decades. The paper crane, for example, had been cataloged, photographed, and examined, but the forensic technology of 2006 could not detect the microscopic traces of DNA that might have clung to its folds. Rhodes' approach was to treat every item as a possible portal to discovery. She believed that where prior investigators saw frustration and dead ends, she could see hints of possibility, waiting patiently for science to catch up. Rhodes also scrutinized the initial witness statements and alibi checks, looking for patterns that may have been dismissed as insignificant at the time. She asked questions differently, hypothesizing that small discrepancies could reveal a timeline or a behavioral signature previously ignored. Her mindset was surgical. She dissected the case not for blame, but for understanding. mapping every movement, every interaction, and every shadow in those 3 fateful blocks of Kendall. As she dug deeper, a pattern began to emerge. Subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. The clues pointed to a calculated perpetrator, one who had been close, familiar with the neighborhood, and careful to avoid detection. Rhodes' meticulous review reframed the investigation, turning the paper crane from a frustrating relic into the potential breakthrough that could finally end the 18-year silence. Her conviction was clear. What 2006 could not solve, 2024 would. And the answers had been waiting all along. With the Martinez file freshly analyzed, Detective Rhodes's team turned their full attention to the paper crane. Unlike the tools available in 2006, modern DNA touch testing could detect microscopic traces left by the faintest contact. Skin cells, sweat, and even tiny amounts of saliva. Every fold, crease, and edge of the delicate origami became a potential source of answers. The lab team handled the crane with extreme care. Each movement was deliberate, slow, and precise, ensuring that nothing was contaminated or overlooked. High-sensitivity swabs were applied to specific points on the paper, and the material was processed using cutting-edge genomic sequencing techniques capable of extracting partial DNA profiles from previously invisible residues. Forensic scientists marveled at how much the technology had advanced, yet they understood the stakes. This fragile crane could hold the key to 18 years of unanswered questions. Rhodes observed every step, her mind focused on both science and strategy. She understood that this was more than an experiment. It was a test of patience, skill, and timing. The tiniest breakthrough could set off a chain reaction, ultimately pointing directly to the person who had disrupted Jessica's life and haunted her family for nearly 2 decades. The tension in the lab was palpable, though controlled. Everyone knew that one misstep could destroy the fragile evidence. And yet, there was an air of quiet hope that the crane, once a silent enigma, could finally speak. As the samples were processed, Rhodes could not help but think of Kincaid, of his years spent staring at the same paper without answers. What the 2006 lab could not see, the 2024 lab would. And in that moment, the possibility of resolution felt closer than it had ever been since August 2006. Weeks of careful processing finally yielded a result that had eluded investigators for nearly 2 decades. The high-sensitivity DNA touch analysis revealed a partial profile, a genetic signature embedded in the folds of the paper crane. It was a breakthrough so precise and unexpected that the lab team could barely contain their excitement. Every prior dead end, every unanswered question, now had the potential to be unraveled. Detective Rhodes reviewed the results with measured intensity. She understood that this was more than science, it was a bridge between past and present, connecting the original investigation to a long-awaited breakthrough. The DNA profile alone could not immediately identify the perpetrator, but it provided a target for the next stage, forensic genetic genealogy. By tracing familial connections, the team could narrow the suspect pool, potentially locating someone who had lived quietly among the community for years, completely unsuspected. The significance of the moment was not lost on Rhodes. What had seemed like a fragile, inconsequential object in 2006, the small folded crane, was now a vessel of revelation. The detective allowed herself a rare, brief smile, aware that the careful patience, diligence, and technology of 2024 had finally transformed an object of frustration into the linchpin of justice. Every fold of the paper crane now carried new meaning. A previously silent witness, finally speaking. Rhodes knew that the following weeks would be critical, that the DNA profile could lead to identifying the person who had stolen Jessica's life and haunted her family for 18 years. This breakthrough marked the turning point in the Martinez case. What the 2006 lab could not detect, the 2024 lab had uncovered. The long shadow of silence was lifting, and the community, and especially Sophia Martinez, were closer than ever to the truth they had waited nearly 2 decades to hear. After months of meticulous work, the lab finally produced a partial DNA profile from the folds of the paper crane. It was a breakthrough that had eluded investigators for nearly 2 decades. The profile was incomplete, yet it contained enough unique markers to be significant. A thread of truth that could be followed through the vast web of human genetics. Detective Helena Rhodes understood the gravity of the moment. The crane, once a frustrating enigma, had become a beacon pointing toward justice. Every swab, every tiny particle of DNA, carried the story of someone who had touched it on the night Jessica disappeared. For Rhodes, it was proof that even the most carefully hidden secrets could eventually be uncovered with patience, technology, and relentless determination. The lab team worked with cautious optimism. Any contamination could ruin the profile, and any misstep could erase the fragile lead that had finally emerged. As the machines hummed and sequences were analyzed, Rhodes felt a mixture of tension and hope. This partial profile might not immediately identify the perpetrator, but it was a tangible step forward, a weapon against the silence that had weighed on the Martinez family for 18 years. The detective allowed herself a brief moment to imagine the breakthrough that could follow. Each time she glanced at the crane, she saw not a mere object, but the fingerprint of a criminal who had evaded justice. A path now illuminated by science. The months of frustration, the endless nights of reviewing cold case files, all converged into this one point. A partial DNA profile that offered possibility where there had once been only dead ends. For the first time since 2006, Rhodes felt that the end of the Martinez case was not just a distant hope, it was achievable. The crane had spoken, and the words it carried were about to echo across time, bridging the gap between past failure and future resolution. The partial DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the national database used to match genetic material from known offenders. Rhodes and her team waited with bated breath. Every failed attempt in the past had left the Martinez case buried in frustration and silence. This time, they hoped for a breakthrough, a connection that would finally identify the person who had disappeared into the night with Jessica. The results came back: 0 matches. The DNA did not belong to anyone in the database. The killer had no criminal record, no prior arrests, no footprint in the system. It was a sobering realization. The person responsible had lived entirely under the radar, untouched by law enforcement, a ghost in plain sight. The lack of a CODIS hit was both a setback and a clue. It confirmed what Rhodes had suspected. The perpetrator had carefully avoided detection for nearly 2 decades. The news hit the team with an unexpected intensity. Excitement mingled with tension. They had a DNA profile, but it pointed to someone entirely unknown. The stakes had suddenly risen. This was no random felon. It was someone who could have been anyone. Perhaps even someone who had once seemed trustworthy, ordinary, invisible in the community. Rhodes knew this was where modern investigative methods had to come into play. Traditional databases had failed, but science had provided a foothold. The DNA, small and partial though it was, could be traced through family connections. The breakthrough wasn't complete, but it was alive. For 18 years, the silence had dominated the Martinez case. Now, that silence had been pierced. The partial profile had transformed uncertainty into a path forward. The killer remained unidentified, yet closer than ever to being revealed. The tension tightened. Someone who had gone unnoticed for years had left a trace. And that trace, however small, was enough to start closing in. With the CODIS results offering no leads, Detective Rhodes turned to a newer, more innovative approach: forensic, genetic genealogy. This technique had revolutionized cold case investigations in recent years, allowing law enforcement to trace unknown DNA to distant relatives through public genealogy databases. It was the perfect tool for the Martinez case, an 18-year-old mystery that had resisted every conventional investigative method. The partial DNA profile from the paper crane was uploaded to an anonymized public database. Strict protocols were followed to ensure privacy, but the potential payoff was enormous. What followed was a patient, painstaking process: filtering matches, identifying common ancestors, and constructing detailed family trees that could potentially connect to someone living near Jessica in 2006. Rhodes and her team worked methodically, cross-referencing records, census data, and historical addresses. Each connection, no matter how distant, was analyzed for relevance. Slowly, the network of possibilities began to take shape. Relatives emerged, sometimes as distant as third cousins, each one a potential link in a chain that could finally lead to the person who had disrupted Jessica's life. Every day, the tension in the office increased. The investigators were aware that time was critical not for the perpetrator, who had lived undisturbed for years, but for the sense of justice and closure that the Martinez family had long been denied. Each new family connection raised questions. Could this be the branch that led to the neighborhood? Could the person responsible have been someone close? Someone unremarkable yet capable of this carefully concealed crime? Rhodes allowed herself no illusions. Forensic genealogy was precise, but it required rigorous validation. Every lead had to be confirmed before moving forward. Yet, the breakthrough was undeniable. The partial DNA had finally become a bridge. After nearly 2 decades of dead ends, science had created a trail, faint but resolvable, leading closer to the person who had haunted Jessica's community. The realization weighed heavily. The killer was not a distant stranger. They had been nearby all along, and forensic genealogy had provided the first clear view of the hidden path. After days of painstaking analysis, the breakthrough came. A match with a third cousin in South Florida. The genealogical data connected the partial DNA profile to a family line that had lived in Miami-Dade County for decades. For Detective Rhodes, the significance was immediate and chilling. The killer was not a stranger from afar. This was someone who had been in the same city, the same streets, possibly the same neighborhood as Jessica in 2006. The investigative team began mapping the family tree, following branches and intersections that led directly into the area surrounding the Martinez home. Every public record, every address history, was cross-referenced to narrow the suspect pool. The profile suggested someone close, too close, whose presence had gone unnoticed in the chaos and attention that followed Jessica's disappearance. Suspense built with each step closer to identifying the suspect. The realization was staggering. A man who had lived among them, someone who may have seemed ordinary, had managed to evade detection for 18 years. The community, which had long feared a phantom predator, was about to face a far more unsettling truth. Rhodes' team focused on those living within the immediate radius of the Martinez residence in 2006. They considered every individual's age, occupation, and access to the neighborhood. Slowly, the investigation sharpened into a precise search, targeting the person who could have been invisible not because of cunning, but because of blending into the background of daily life. The final thought hung over the team like a shadow. Someone close. Too close. It was a revelation that reframed everything. The fear, the silence, the years of uncertainty. The person who had stolen Jessica's life had been living steps away, hidden in plain sight. While the community remained oblivious, the stage was set. With science illuminating the path, Detective Rhodes and her team were ready to confront the person who had evaded justice for nearly 2 decades. With the genealogical tree fully mapped, Detective Rhodes's team began the painstaking process of elimination. Each branch, each potential connection, was carefully scrutinized. Ages, locations, and historical addresses were cross-referenced against the Martinez neighborhood in 2006. Many leads proved irrelevant. Distant relatives living out of state, individuals with airtight alibis, or those without any plausible connection to the community. As the team narrowed the field, the tension in the office became almost tangible. Every dead end was a reminder of the case's history. 18 years of unanswered questions, frustration, and silent suffering for Sofia Martinez. Yet, with each elimination, the investigative net grew tighter. There was no room for error, no space for assumptions. Finally, the search began to converge on a single individual. Every other branch had been ruled out, leaving only one person whose proximity, age, and circumstances in 2006 made them a viable suspect. The realization was staggering. The perpetrator had not been a stranger lurking on the outskirts of the city, nor someone with a criminal record. Instead, they had been quietly living in the neighborhood, their presence overlooked by everyone, including law enforcement during the initial investigation. Detective Rhodes felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief that the investigation had finally identified a tangible target, dread for what was coming next. Confirming the identity of someone who had blended seamlessly into everyday life, while committing a crime that had haunted an entire community. The investigative team prepared to focus on this individual. Every detail of his life would be examined, every alibi tested, every behavior analyzed. The net had closed. There was no escaping the truth any longer. The next step would take them from theory to action, from suspicion to evidence. And it was here, at this narrow point in the genealogical maze, that the identity of the person who had haunted Jessica's community for 18 years would finally come into focus. The name emerged quietly in the files. Theodore Hawthorne. On paper, he was an unremarkable man, just another resident of the Kendall neighborhood in 2006. At 35 years old, he had lived 5 houses down from the Martinez family, a neighbor known for his reliability, discretion, and low-profile lifestyle. He taught high school history at a nearby school, correcting papers and leading lessons with an unassuming calm that drew no attention. Theodore's routine had been ordinary, almost painfully so. He returned home each evening, tended to his small garden, and exchanged polite greetings with neighbors. There were no complaints, no confrontations, no whispers of suspicion. In a world where danger can hide behind the most familiar faces, Theodore's ordinariness became his camouflage. Detective Rhodes studied the details of his 2006 life carefully. The suspect's work schedule, the few interactions he had with students and colleagues, even the local shops he frequented, all were consistent with a life lived publicly, yet privately detached. He had been invisible in the moments that mattered, slipping under the radar with a precision that was almost mundane. The tension of discovery was overwhelming. For 18 years, the community had feared a phantom predator, someone unpredictable and external. The reality was far more unsettling. The threat had been quiet, ordinary, woven into daily life without raising alarms. Rhodes' team realized the implications. The person responsible for Jessica's disappearance was not distant or exotic. He had been a trusted presence, a neighbor who could wave from his driveway and blend seamlessly into the landscape of the street. The simplicity of his facade made the crime more horrifying, the betrayal more acute, and the hunt more urgent. The focus had sharpened. Theodore Hawthorne, ordinary to all who knew him, was now the man under scrutiny. Every detail of his life in 2006 would be examined, every corner of his routine dissected. As the investigation moved closer to the truth, 18 years had passed since Jessica Martinez disappeared, and Theodore Hawthorne had transformed his life, or at least, his public persona. In 2024, he was a respected guidance counselor at a local community college, a mentor to students and a volunteer in youth programs. Parents praised his dedication, colleagues admired his calm demeanor, and neighbors described him as dependable, generous, and trustworthy. The contrast between his current life and the terrifying truth of 2006 was stark. To the community, he was the embodiment of normalcy, someone who helped organize local events, coached chess for children, and offered advice to those struggling with school or personal problems. Nothing about him hinted at the darkness that had unfolded nearly 2 decades earlier. Detective Rhodes and her team felt the weight of that contrast keenly. The ordinary veneer made the investigation delicate. Any misstep could alert Hawthorne and destroy the fragile window of evidence they were building. Yet, every careful observation, every subtle movement, hinted at a man who had perfected the art of invisibility. The team documented every facet of his daily life. The routine trips to the grocery store, the quiet evenings at home, the voluntary activities in which he participated. To the public, he was harmless. To Rhodes, every ordinary gesture was a piece of the puzzle, a reminder that danger often hides behind familiarity and trust. The realization settled in. The person who had robbed a family of their child, shattered a neighborhood, and haunted Miami for nearly 20 years, had been living among them as a model citizen. It was a chilling reminder that the most ordinary people can conceal the most extraordinary crimes. The next step was crucial. Surveillance would continue, eyes fixed on Hawthorne, until the moment arrived that could link him definitively to the crime. A moment that would expose the hidden predator and bring nearly 2 decades of uncertainty to an end. Detective Rhodes' team began surveillance with precision. Every step of Theodore Hawthorne's day was monitored discreetly. The morning commute, the interactions at the community college, the afternoons spent coaching chess, and his evenings at home. Each movement was noted, every pattern logged, creating a detailed picture of a man who had mastered the appearance of normalcy. The tension was palpable. For 18 years, Jessica's family had waited. The neighborhood had feared. And now, after years of dead ends, the suspect was within reach. Yet the investigators knew that one misstep could allow Hawthorne to disappear or destroy crucial evidence. Every action had to be recorded without alerting him to the scrutiny he was under. The breakthrough came unexpectedly on a Monday morning. Hawthorne had volunteered for a neighborhood cleanup, a public display of goodwill that drew attention and built trust. As he walked away from the community park, he discarded a half-full bottle of water into a nearby trash can. To any ordinary observer, it was a mundane act, part of daily life. To Rhodes and her team, it was the opportunity they had been waiting for. The discarded bottle represented the critical piece of the puzzle, a new chance to collect DNA directly from the suspect without confrontation. After years of painstaking research and careful observation, this single act of negligence provided the bridge between forensic evidence from 2006 and the living suspect in 2024. The team moved swiftly but silently, ensuring that every chain of custody protocol was followed. The moment highlighted a chilling truth. Theodore Hawthorne's careful, ordinary life had shielded him for years, but one small action had changed everything. The suspense mounted as the evidence made its way to the lab. The moment of truth was approaching, and the investigators prepared for the confirmation that would finally close a chapter that had haunted an entire community for nearly 2 decades. The water bottle collected from Hawthorne's hand was sent immediately to the lab for analysis. Every detail, from handling to storage, was meticulously documented to ensure the integrity of the evidence. Rhodes and her team waited with tense anticipation as forensic specialists prepared to compare the DNA from the bottle to the microscopic profile recovered from the paper crane nearly 2 decades earlier. Hours later, the results arrived. A perfect match. The DNA signature confirmed what the investigation had been pointing toward. The person who had taken Jessica Martinez had been living among her neighbors all along. The ordinary man who waved at children, offered guidance, and blended seamlessly into daily life was, in fact, the perpetrator who had haunted Miami since 2006. The team allowed themselves a quiet moment of realization. After 18 years, the silence had finally been shattered, and the truth could no longer hide behind routine or ordinariness. Theodore Hawthorne had been discovered, identified, and now could no longer escape accountability. As the gravity of the breakthrough settled, Rhodes addressed the significance of the moment, a cautionary reminder that danger sometimes hides in plain sight. The ordinary, trusted neighbor, the person who seems harmless, can, in rare and horrifying cases, be the source of unspeakable tragedy. Cases like this remind us danger hides in plain sight. Subscribe so you're never blindsided. The DNA match marked the climax of nearly 2 decades of investigation. From forensic genealogy to careful surveillance, each step had brought the team closer to exposing the man who had stolen Jessica's life. Justice was no longer theoretical. It was imminent, tangible, and unavoidable. The community, the family, and the investigators could finally face the truth. The stage was set for the arrest, confession, and the unmasking of a predator who had, for years, lived in plain view. The nightmare that began in August 2006 was about to meet its long-awaited conclusion. The arrest was executed with precision, far from the quiet streets of Kendall where Jessica Martinez had vanished nearly 2 decades earlier. Detective Rhodes and her team understood the stakes. A public spectacle could inflame emotions, compromise evidence, and endanger both the suspect and bystanders. The location was carefully chosen, a nondescript office building on the outskirts of the city. Neutral territory where control was absolute. Hawthorne's routine had been ordinary and predictable, but the precision of law enforcement caught him entirely off guard. Officers approached calmly, speaking in measured tones, while Rhodes maintained oversight from a distance. The man who had quietly existed among neighbors, blended seamlessly into the rhythm of a community, now found himself surrounded, constrained, and observed. The shock was immediate. To the officers, the gravity of the moment was unmistakable. This was the individual who had haunted a family and an entire neighborhood for 18 years. For Rhodes, the culmination of years of investigation was tangible. No more theories, no more dead ends. Every lead, every genetic match, every painstaking observation had led to this exact moment. As Hawthorne was handcuffed, the contrast between his calm exterior and the magnitude of what he had done could not have been starker. The ordinary man, the trusted neighbor, volunteer, mentor, was now in custody, stripped of anonymity. For the Martinez family, this arrest would mark the beginning of the end of their long psychological wait. For the community, it would shatter the lingering illusion of safety. And for Rhodes and her team, it confirmed a bitter truth. The most devastating crimes are sometimes committed by those who seem the least capable of them. The stage was set for the confrontation that would unravel decades of silence, beginning in the sterile intensity of the interrogation room. The interrogation room was quiet, clinical, and tense. The fluorescent overhead lights hummed softly, bouncing off the stark walls. Detective Helena Rhodes sat across from Theodore Hawthorne, her posture calm but deliberate, her eyes fixed on the man who had evaded justice for 18 years. On the table between them lay 2 objects: a faded photograph of Jessica Martinez, smiling in the carefree glow of her final summer, and the paper crane, pristine despite its age, a silent witness to a crime that had tormented an entire community. Hawthorne's eyes flicked to the crane first. He did not flinch, but the faintest tension rippled across his features. Rhodes allowed the moment to stretch, watching for cracks, for any hint of recognition or guilt. Every second in that room heightened the psychological pressure. The ordinary routine that had defined Hawthorne's life was now a cage. The crane, folded with deliberate care, was more than paper. It was a symbol of control, a message left behind, to taunt, to confound. Rhodes leaned forward, her voice steady, her tone unshakable. She described how the DNA match had been confirmed, how every step had led to him, and how the quiet life he had built could no longer protect him. Theodore's calm began to waver imperceptibly. He shifted, eyes darting between Rhodes and the crane, a subtle acknowledgement that the facade of ordinariness could no longer shield him. The detective had set the stage perfectly. Every piece of evidence, every unspoken implication, was designed to fracture the mental armor he had relied on for nearly 2 decades. This was the point where the story would begin to unravel, where the psychological walls of the man who had haunted Miami silently for years would start to collapse under the weight of truth. For 18 years, Theodore Hawthorne had maintained a facade of calm, blending seamlessly into the world around him. But now, seated across from Detective Rhodes, the layers of composure he had built began to crack. Every carefully constructed routine, every act of ordinariness, was suddenly irrelevant in the face of overwhelming evidence and the silent accusation of the paper crane. Hawthorne's eyes darted around the room, searching for some escape, some argument to deflect the inevitability. His hands, previously steady, twitched against the table. The realization that the crane, once dismissed as a curious anomaly, had become the linchpin of his capture, weighed heavily on him. The meticulous control that had defined him for years was slipping through his fingers like sand. Rhodes spoke with a quiet intensity, layering facts, details, and the inexorable logic of forensic science. Each revelation was a psychological hammer, driving home the point. His time hiding behind the ordinary was over. Hawthorne's breathing grew uneven. His jaw tightened. The calm, gentle mentor that the world had admired was giving way to a man confronting the inevitability of exposure. Small admissions began to slip through. Hesitations, pauses, fragments of phrases that hinted at understanding, fear, and unexpectedly a twinge of frustration. He realized that his intellect and careful planning could not protect him now. The weight of years of secrecy, the knowledge that a community had lived under the shadow of his actions, pressed down on him relentlessly. In that moment, the room was filled with silent tension. The psychological break was subtle but undeniable, the beginning of the unraveling that would lead to full confession. The predator was no longer invisible. The human behind the horror was emerging, exposed and fragile under the unrelenting light of truth. Theodore Hawthorne finally spoke, his voice low and measured at first, but carrying an undercurrent of frustration and resignation. The walls he had built around his secret life began to collapse as he recounted the events of that August night in 2006. He confessed to abducting Jessica Martinez not out of passion, anger, or revenge, but because she had captivated him in a way he described coldly, clinically, as a distraction from the ordinary. His words chilled the room. He explained the reasoning behind leaving the paper crane, his pride in its precise folds, and his sense of control over a crime that had eluded detection for nearly 2 decades. To him, the crane was a signature, a token of his intellect and foresight. Rhodes listened, observing the interplay between his meticulous planning and the perverse satisfaction he derived from the years of concealment. Despite the horror of his actions, Hawthorne spoke with unsettling calm about the steps he had taken to appear invisible. He rationalized the crime as a puzzle, a challenge to be executed with perfection. Every calculated choice, his timing, the location, the silence he maintained, reflected the cold, measured mindset of a man who had considered himself untouchable. Yet beneath his pride, there was unmistakable tension. The inevitability of accountability had finally caught up with him, and the carefully curated persona of a trusted neighbor was shattering. Hawthorne's confession blended chilling rationality with the faint stirrings of fear, exposing both the brilliance and the moral depravity of a man who had lived among them for years. The room held a heavy, suspended silence. What had been hidden for nearly 20 years was now fully revealed. The confession was not just an admission of guilt. It was the prelude to understanding Jessica's final moments, the moment when the payoff of truth would reach its devastating conclusion. With the confession underway, Rhodes guided the conversation toward Jessica's final moments. The details were painful, precise, and deeply human. Every choice Hawthorne made, every step he forced Jessica to take, was revealed not with emotion, but with chilling calculation. Through his own words, the investigators, and eventually the audience, began to understand the terror she must have experienced in those last hours. Hawthorne described the abduction with cold, clinical detachment, yet the gravity of the act was undeniable. He admitted that Jessica had been frightened, aware of the danger she could not escape, and that her resistance had shaped the course of that night. Every action he recounted amplified the horror not through violence alone, but through the absolute betrayal of trust and the violation of safety within a community that had believed him harmless. Sophia Martinez's perspective was woven in, capturing the emotional weight of the revelation. Her steadfast love, the quiet vigil she had maintained for 18 years, and the pain of not knowing were brought into sharp focus. The audience felt the profound release and heartbreak simultaneously, the ending of a psychological purgatory for Sophia, but the confirmation of a life lost far too early. The final payoff came with the realization that the man who had seemed invisible, ordinary, and safe had been the source of an unimaginable crime. The community's fear, long dormant, gave way to the clarity of truth. Justice had finally arrived. The confession allowed closure, not just for the investigation, but for a family and a neighborhood forever changed. The interrogation room, once a place of tension and uncertainty, now held the undeniable weight of resolution. Jessica Martinez's story, filled with courage and tragedy, had finally been told in full, and the nightmare that began on a humid August night in 2006 had reached its long-awaited conclusion. The news hit Miami like a thunderclap. Theodore Hawthorne, the man who had quietly walked among neighbors for nearly 2 decades, was unmasked as the person responsible for Jessica Martinez's disappearance. The revelation spread instantly through media outlets, social media, and community networks, leaving residents reeling in disbelief. Parents whispered warnings to one another. Friends revisited old memories with uneasy suspicion. And the streets where Jessica had vanished seemed heavier, weighed down by the knowledge that evil had been so close. Comments and posts flooded local news pages. Neighbors expressed shock, anger, and guilt for never suspecting him. The collective question echoed everywhere. How could someone so ordinary harbor such darkness? Miami's sense of security, long dormant after the initial crisis faded, had been shattered. For 18 years, residents had feared a faceless, unknowable predator, but the truth was far closer than anyone could have imagined. Rumors and speculation initially ran rampant. Why had he never been caught? How many clues had been overlooked? The meticulous investigation that led to his capture only intensified the community's mix of awe and horror. People revisited old memories, recalling passing smiles, waves, and casual conversations with a man they had never questioned. The revelation forced a painful reconciliation. The monster they had imagined in the shadows had been living openly in plain sight. Even those who had long since moved away from Kendall felt the weight of the news. The sense of betrayal was universal. No one was immune to the realization that ordinary appearances could conceal extraordinary danger. Community meetings, online forums, and local gatherings buzzed with a mix of relief, grief, and lingering fear. Miami was awake to a truth that was both terrifying and oddly validating. Justice had finally arrived. Hawthorne had been caught, the case resolved. But the memory of those 18 years of uncertainty would linger. The city, scarred but vigilant, had been forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. The predator had never been far. The high school where Theodore Hawthorne had once taught was thrown into shock. Faculty members, some still working at the school and others who had long since retired, struggled to process the revelation. He had been a history teacher, a trusted mentor to dozens of students, and an unassuming presence in faculty meetings. Now, that same quiet man was linked to a crime that had haunted the community for 18 years. Statements were quickly issued by the school administration, expressing horror, sorrow, and a commitment to supporting students and staff affected by the revelation. "We are deeply saddened by the events tied to a former member of our faculty," one statement read. Teachers, both past and present, described Hawthorne as professional, polite, and reliable, but the contrast between the public image and his hidden life only amplified the shock. Students, both those who remembered him and those who had only heard stories, reacted with disbelief and anger. Former classmates recalled seemingly ordinary interactions, questions about assignments, advice on life decisions, even casual encouragement during school events. Each memory was now tainted with the chilling knowledge of what had really been happening behind the closed doors of normalcy. Rumors and whispers filled the hallways, online platforms, and neighborhood discussions. Parents worried about other figures of authority, questioning the reliability of those in positions of trust. The realization that Hawthorne had maintained an ordinary, even admirable, public persona while committing a horrific crime created a sense of betrayal that extended far beyond the Martinez family. The school community was left to grapple with dual realities: pride in their current students' resilience, and the disquieting recognition that danger had walked the same halls they once trusted. The contrast between Hawthorne's public image and his actions underscored a haunting truth. Evil can often hide behind the most ordinary of appearances, and the consequences of ignoring subtle warning signs can linger for years. Sophia Martinez watched the news conference unfold from the quiet of her living room, the television screen casting a pale glow across the room she had kept untouched for 18 years. The photograph of Jessica on the screen, her smile frozen in time, carried the weight of all those years of fear, uncertainty, and relentless hope. Sophia did not weep, did not cry out in anguish. She simply nodded, a subtle acknowledgement that the long, suffocating purgatory she had lived through was finally over. Her mind traced the entire journey. The frantic calls to police in the early hours, the relentless media scrutiny, the endless nights spent staring at the empty space where her daughter's bed once was. She remembered the whispers of neighbors, the passing glances of sympathy and pity, and the hollow ring of unanswered phone calls. All of it had led to this moment: justice, recognition, and the hard-earned closure that came with truth finally revealed. Sophia's advocacy over the years, petitioning for cold case units, pressing for new forensic technology, refusing to let Jessica's story fade, had been a lifeline not just for herself, but for countless other families trapped in the limbo of unresolved loss. She realized, with a bittersweet clarity, that her endurance had played a role in bringing the case to its conclusion. Though relief softened the edges of her grief, it did not erase it. Jessica was gone forever, and the absence she had endured would remain a permanent part of Sophia's life. Yet, there was a distinct weight lifted, a burden she had carried alone, quietly, in the stillness of a home that had become both sanctuary and shrine. For Sophia, the capture of Theodore Hawthorne was not only justice, it was affirmation. Her daughter's life had mattered. Her vigil had mattered. And finally, the story could be told in full, with the truth standing unflinching and complete. The revelation that Theodore Hawthorne had lived among them shattered the community's sense of safety. For years, Miami had feared a faceless, unknown predator, but the truth forced residents to confront a far harsher reality. The danger had been ordinary, unremarkable, and terrifyingly close. The streets, once familiar, now felt strange and uncertain. Every friendly wave, casual smile, and neighborly gesture was re-examined with suspicion. Community meetings were held to discuss the unsettling truth, with parents, neighbors, and local leaders struggling to articulate the betrayal they felt. Conversations buzzed with disbelief. How could someone so seemingly normal commit such a calculated crime? How many warning signs had been overlooked? The fear that had once been distant now became intimate, a reminder that evil often hides in plain sight. For many, the trust in ordinary life was permanently altered. The man they waved to, the volunteer at local events, the mentor who offered guidance to youth, he had been responsible for a horror that scarred an entire city. The realization that someone could commit such a crime without ever raising suspicion weighed heavily on the collective conscience. Residents reflected on their own assumptions, questioning what had allowed a predator to remain invisible. The lesson was uncomfortable yet vital. Appearances are not guarantees of safety. Vigilance, awareness, and the willingness to question the ordinary became the new currency of community security. Despite the fear and betrayal, there was a sense of resilience. Miami had endured the unknown for 18 years, and now armed with the truth, it could rebuild a foundation of cautious trust. The story of Jessica Martinez became both a warning and a guide, a reminder that danger may lurk close to home, and that awareness and vigilance are essential tools for survival. The final chapter of Jessica Martinez's story settled over Miami like the heavy calm after a storm. Residents, once consumed by fear of the unknown, could finally process the truth. The predator had been walking among them, living an ordinary life, while hiding a dark secret. The community's collective heartbeat, held in suspense for nearly 2 decades, began to slow, replaced by cautious reflection and a fragile sense of closure. Sophia Martinez sat quietly, absorbing the finality of the case. The weight she had carried alone, the grief, the anger, the endless uncertainty was finally lifted. Her home, a time capsule of memories and quiet devotion, had borne witness to her daughter's absence and her unwavering fight for justice. Now, as the truth emerged, she allowed herself the subtle relief of closure. Jessica's life, though tragically cut short, had not been forgotten. The city, too, faced a reckoning. Trust had been broken, but lessons were now visible in every corner. The ordinary could hide the extraordinary, and vigilance must accompany community life. Conversations shifted from speculation to reflection, from fear to understanding. The story of Jessica's disappearance and the eventual capture of Theodore Hawthorne became a blueprint for awareness, a reminder that danger can be both distant and close, often simultaneously. As the final headlines faded and news cycles moved on, the echo of Jessica's story lingered. Families re-examined safety in their own neighborhoods, communities strengthened their watchfulness, and individuals reflected on the fragility of perceived security. The narrative concluded not with spectacle, but with the quiet, resonant truth that justice, though delayed, had been served. Stay aware. Stay safe. Subscribe, so you're never blindsided by stories that teach survival. The tale of Jessica Martinez ended with a mixture of sorrow and relief, an emotional testament to endurance, vigilance, and the enduring power of truth. Miami would never forget, and neither should anyone who learns from her story.